Mazda made the 2026 Mazda 3 manual less powerful on purpose. They removed cylinder deactivation and accepted the 5 horsepower penalty. The question isn't whether this new car is slower. It is. The question is whether this is the $33,000 manual hatchback to own after the warranty expires. "186 horsepower at 6,000 RPM, down from 191, and in some press offices, that causes panic. But somebody at Mazda looked at the cylinder deactivation hardware, looked at the complaints, and chose the smaller number. And that's good, because with the responsiveness of this engine, the manual gearbox, the clutch, that 5 horsepower loss completely disappears. The reliability you gain is also invisible. That comes later. And that's the first clue that Mazda is not trying to win the spec sheet battle. They're trying to make this car feel right every time you leave from a stop. It makes 186 pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM, and it has a torque curve that's flat enough that you can leave it in fourth, at least until a hill reminds you to downshift. Throttle response is so linear, and I think the turbo generation doesn't know what it's missing. Skyactiv-G is a marketing term for this engine, which runs at 13-to-1 compression, is able to run on regular fuel, and get away with it. The engine pulls to 6,500 RPM without pretending to be a sports car motor. And the best part, there's no synthesized engine sound coming through the speakers. It sounds like a 4-cylinder doing honest work. Mazda assumed that you prefer the actual sound of the actual engine, and in context of what other manufacturers are doing, that might be a dangerous assumption. The clutch bite point is exactly where it should be. No, it's not as crisp as what you get in an MX-5, but it's still crisp enough while being forgiving, and it's progressive anytime you're releasing the clutch, especially in lower gears. One of the things I appreciate about the gearbox is that the shifter self-centers, not overtly, but just enough back to the 3/4 slot. So it's assisting you with gear changes politely instead of being a heavy hand. And this one feels like someone in the engineering department still cared after the spreadsheet meeting ended. There is no limited slip diff. Mazda still runs an open diff, and of course there are the electronic systems like stability control and traction control. And since this is a Mazda, there's also GVC Plus quietly running in the background, trimming torque to make those corner exits feel tidy without a mechanical clutch pack pretending to be your driving talent. Subscribers get notified when new episodes drop on this channel. Everyone else leaves it to the algorithm. If you want to control when you see our episodes on YouTube, well, that's what the subscribe button does. I'm legally required to tell you that this segment is sponsored by Go Clean. I'm ethically required to tell you that I use their waterless car wash. Here's the reality of filming cars. They don't have to be perfectly clean, but they have to be clean enough to survive a close-up. I call that video clean. For that job, this waterless car wash is ideal. A few sprays, quick wipe, and the car goes from someone drove it here to camera ready in minutes. I'm not going to oversell it. I use it, I like it, and it's in my kit now. That's video clean. Use code MAX15 for 15% off. Steering is electrically assisted, of course, and how clear, how responsive these are is dependent upon how well the calibration has been done. Turn-in is immediate. The weight loads up as you get through the corner. Exiting the corner, no trouble. Releasing, steering lock does everything I want. The only thing I'd like is a little bit more feel from those 2 front contact patches, but the quality of feedback through the chassis is excellent, and I can feel what's going on at all 4 contact patches perfectly. This car is so happy in the corners. Off camber here on the exit, no trouble putting down power. Little brake, turn in, pick up the throttle. This thing just tracks perfectly through the corners. Sure, you're not getting a hydraulically assisted steering rack, and that's not going to happen in this category in 2026. What you are getting, however, is one of the best modern electrically assisted steering systems that was calibrated by drivers and engineers who actually care. In the corners, this thing does exactly what I want. Turn in is immediate. It tracks properly all the way from corner entry through mid-corner, through the exit. And if you lift mid-corner, this nose tucks in, the rear rotates, and if you look at the spec sheet only, you're not going to think that's possible. Body roll is here. It's permitted just as it is in the MX-5. On the other hand, Mazda doesn't bind up the suspension with stiff springs and overly damp shocks. They actually let the suspension work. It's quite a contrast to what some other manufacturers do when they do the same thing, because they want people like me to tell people like you that their car is eager in the corners. The suspension lets the body lean and take a set in the corners and load up those outside tires. The best part is you get very clear information as to how much grip is actually left. And that's the second clue. This car isn't trying to flatter you with fake cornering composure. It's trying to tell you the truth about its attitude through a corner early enough so that you can use it. This car has one big misconception, it seems, and the torsion beam rear suspension gets flagged in every review because it's easier for some people to identify suspension architecture than chassis behavior. And fine, gold star, it has a torsion beam. Now tell me what it does badly. Didn't think so. Corner entry, mid-corner, corner exit, this thing tracks perfectly at every phase of a corner. Lift mid-corner, the nose tucks in, the rear rotates predictably just enough to get you through the corner without turning the next few seconds into lengthy paperwork. On rough pavement, mid-corner bumps, whatever the case is, there's enough compliance in that torsion beam to make sure that the rear stays planted. And that, my friends, is the part that most reviews miss. Calling this car worse than its competitors is like calling a 911 bad because its engine's in the wrong place. And sure, that's defensible from an engineering perspective, but it's still missing the point. Some independent rear suspensions communicate less than this torsion beam, but they sure do look good on a spec sheet. And apparently that still counts for some people. The question never was whether the Mazda 3 had the cheaper suspension layout. It does. The question was whether Mazda tuned this suspension setup better than some manufacturers tune their independent rear suspensions. And they do. I spent a lot of time behind the wheel of this Mazda 3 and looked for every opportunity for bad roads, bad corners, even took it on the racetrack and don't tell Mazda, and couldn't find any evidence of bad behavior from that torsion beam rear suspension. I love this brake pedal. It's firm and progressive, has the same predictable feel from that first millimeter of travel all the way through the travel, depending on how much braking you need. Single piston calipers, 280 millimeter front rotors, does not sound remarkable in the least. What is remarkable, however, is when you've got a properly tuned master cylinder and booster that aren't making up for a cheap brake pad. Feel, control, modulation, all perfect, no surprises. And I think in the braking engineering world, surprises come from engineers who left before the final calibration was done. It's early spring here, and this Mazda 3 hasn't been switched over to its summer tires, so we're on a nice set of winter tires. There's a little bit of squirm that comes from these winter tires under braking, but it's the tire, not the car. If you want to support the channel beyond just watching, well, the merch store link is here where you can get stuff like this, and your support there means more time for us to produce episodes like this and a little less time worrying about industry access. No pressure, just an option. Behind the wheel, The hip point is nice and low, and the seating position is just right. Forward visibility was obviously refined by somebody who still wants to see the road. The hood drops away out of sight so you can see where the road is. This allows you to place the car perfectly through any turn, especially that critical right front corner. Yes, some people will complain that rearward visibility is compromised by the large C-pillars, but of course, adjust your mirrors properly and blind spots aren't real. Also, a reminder that this low hip point puts you below the seating position of every crossover on the market. One of the key selling features of crossovers, of course, is that commanding seating position. This Mazda 3, it doesn't care. The fundamentals are perfect. This seat is powered, the passenger seat isn't, but what I'm able to do is set up a perfect seating position here. There's plenty of adjustment in the steering column as well as the seats, and I've got a great relationship to this wheel and to the all-important 3 pedals. And of course, it's a Mazda. They build cars for drivers. The pedals are spaced perfectly for heel and toe. No trouble reaching that throttle pedal when you've got your right foot on the brake to blip the throttle, and the throttle is responsive. It just works perfectly. Then there's one setting that's buried deep in this system submenu. Mazda allows you to disable the pedal misapplication warning, the one that plagues lots of other cars when you're pressing the brake and the gas pedal simultaneously. And to do a proper heel and toe, that's exactly what you have to do. Mazda knows that some buyers of this car are the ones doing perfectly rev-matched heel and toe downshifts on the way home from work. If you don't know how to heel and toe and are curious or need to brush up on your technique, well, the link to our episode on that is here. It's the best episode of its kind on YouTube, and if you've got a Mazda 3, a properly executed heel and toe downshift is so rewarding, you definitely deserve to know how to do it right. Love these seats as well in terms of both comfort and cornering support. There's enough bolstering to hold you in place when the corners get interesting, but they're not so aggressive that they're going to compromise your comfort on a long road trip. This Mazda 3 still uses the old Mazda infotainment interface, which has to be said because Mazda's walking away from it. The 2026 Mazda CX-5 has that massive screen that's available, but that's not really the story. The story is reduced physical controls because you can use voice control. Google's built in and Gemini is built in. There's no doubt that in our automotive future, big screens are less of a concern because voice controls in natural language will be doing most of the work. And perhaps Google and Gemini can hear you perfectly when you've got a couple of kids arguing with each other in the back seat. Volume is a proper dial, climate controls are proper buttons and dials, and the infotainment controller is a proper multifunction dial. This infotainment system isn't trying to become your co-driver or your content ecosystem. Thankfully, it allows you to change the temperature or the fan speed without having to consult a server farm. The interior materials are premium, the design is minimalist, and I like to think of this as a car that's finished like something that cost $70,000, but Mazda forgot to charge you the difference. The second row is compromised for taller human beings, and I can barely fit behind myself in this seating position. Headroom's a little tight as well, but in terms of it being a hatchback, well, it does that very well. You can fold down the rear seats. The hatchback itself is large and wide, so you can fit larger items in this Mazda 3. The like button tells YouTube to share this episode with more people like you interested in an episode like this, and if this gave you more information than a brochure or a press release, that's the entire ask. That's what the Mazda 3 told me after a week behind the wheel. Here's what owners have to say after months or years behind the wheel. The first issue is packaging. The manual only comes on the expensive non-turbo hatchback. $36,895 in Canada. The US equivalent is the Mazda 3 Hatchback 2.5S Premium Manual, with this car running $33,280 as tested. There is no cloth seat, smaller wheel, give me the good bits version. Mazda will sell you 3 pedals, but only after you buy the premium starter pack. The second issue
issue is paint. BP generation owners talk about thin clear coat with the grim consistency of people who have already priced PPF. Third is the manual's occasional first gear reluctance at a stop. For what it's worth, I haven't experienced this with any Mazda 3 manual. The owners that have found a workaround. Find second, back to neutral, then first. Mazda dealers say they can't reproduce it. Of course they can't. The car knows. These are the ownership realities, and the 2026 twist is simple. Mazda removed one major mechanical system owners kept complaining about. For once, the update reads like the car company actually listened. If you own one of these or have some quality seat time behind the wheel of one of these, let me know in the comments what I got right and what I got wrong, because real-world owner experiences are much more valuable than anything I can learn in a week-long press loan, and I always read those comments. Yes, Mazda removed the cylinder deactivation hardware that produced 191 horsepower last year, and sure, that 5 horsepower loss is real. On paper. From the driver's seat, the manual combined with the chassis that Mazda's been refining since 2019, the difference isn't noticeable. What is noticeable is the pattern. Simple engine, straightforward manual, beautifully balanced chassis, usable cabin. Owner complaints actually answered. And for me, and I think for a lot of owners, that's the better story. If your daily commute is under 20 miles of straight road, you don't need this car. If your commute includes back roads, roundabouts, on-ramps with any kind of radius, you need this car. This Mazda 3 is for the driver who believes that driving is still a skill and refuses to buy something that ignores that. The cylinder deactivation system that owners complained about is finally gone. The chassis that they've been praising for the last several years is still here. And some will say that the trim packaging is still annoying, but the car underneath it is the best version of this car that Mazda has ever built. Mazda is one of the last manufacturers selling a 6-speed manual in a non-sport compact at this price. Others used to. They stopped. Mazda didn't. The window for cars like this closes the moment someone in the finance department does the math. Buy the last naturally aspirated hatchback manual on the market before regulations force us into electrified automated toasters. That's the Mazda 3. Subscribe if you want to see more episodes like this. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree. And if you want to help fund more of these, the merch store is open. See you on the next one.